Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I think we'll just give it one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, Reggie, you ready to get started?
Sure, if you are.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump into this. Today we're going to talk about negotiation techniques and some things that go into your negotiations. This little overview of what we're going to be covering. So we're going to talk about, it's not, oh, there we go. Okay, sorry, my screen's being a little bit weird. So I got Lauren here making sure everything looks right for you guys. We're going to start with talking about managing personalities that you negotiate with, asking the right questions and doing the research, identifying what's negotiable, what's non-negotiable, and then we're going to talk about some negotiation contingencies. But you guys feel free to stop us at any time if you guys have any questions or examples or anything you guys want to discuss. All right, so starting with identifying and managing personality types. There's a ton of different personality tests that you guys can take, tons of different ways of categorizing different types of personalities. I feel like this DISC assessment is one of the easiest to identify, even people that you don't know what kind of personality they're in. So we have the direct people, which are confident, they're strong-willed, they're just looking for the bottom line results. They just want to get to the point. It's all about business. Influencers are usually more focused on the relationship, making this more personal. They like to keep it positive and offer ranges of solutions. And sometimes it can really help to make a connection with these type of people to get the deal done. And then we've got steady people. They're more even-tempered. Their emphasis is on cooperation. So just making everybody happy, everybody working together, and everybody reaching the same end goal. And then the checklister, kind of similar to the direct personality, the more analytical. These are the people that want to see, the spreadsheets, the data, the numbers, and everything that goes into the decision that they're making. Do you guys have you guys ever done any of these type of assessments? Do you know where you fall into these different personality types, or have you ever found yourself in a situation where you're working with an opposite personality type? Anybody? I can't see you guys on this screen right now while I'm sharing, so you'll have to speak up if you have any questions or want to comment on anything.
Yeah. And I've done a few of these assessments over the years myself, and it's definitely helpful to understand the other side and what type of person you're dealing with, especially when it comes to maybe how you present an idea or make a proposal to them. Sometimes, it's really important for certain types like the checklisters and the direct to maybe back that up with some data where your influencers might be a little more of the warm and fuzzy stuff. So it's definitely important to kind of understand, maybe what type of broker you're working with on the other side, or other agent, or if you're working directly with a seller or business owner or whatever it might be, just to try to align your process with their way of thinking, basically, can be very helpful.
I think that this is also a good example of why, just the importance of reaching out to, the cooperating agent that you're working with and negotiating with, via a phone call instead of just texting. If you're going to start negotiating with them, you want to get your offer accepted, or maybe you're on the opposite side, you want to know what kind of offers you're going to accept. It's always best to get them on the phone and have a little bit of a chat with them and get a feel for what kind of personality you're going to be dealing with. I think even just a quick 5-minute phone call can really tell you a lot about someone. All right, well, let's move on. Um, Asking the right questions. So when you're working, these are more focused on the residential side, kind of similar on the commercial side too. But when you're working with a seller, you obviously want to get to know their personality as well, if you don't already. But you want to know their background, you want to know their motivation, their timeline. All of these things can go into your negotiation. So why are they selling? Maybe they're just selling because they want the money. They want to cash out. They're just done with the property and ready to move on. Or maybe they're selling because, grandma moved out of the house. This house has been in the family for 50 years and they want to see it go to a nice family. That can really make a big difference on how you're going to be negotiating your contract. Um, I put on here, ideally, when are you moving out of this property? I feel like that is a great way to get a gauge for their timeline. Are we in a huge rush? We need to get done and get out of here quickly, because that could make the negotiations on price a little bit different and closing date. Or are they in no rush? They just want to make sure that it goes to the right person. That can really change a lot of things too. Obviously, what improvements have been made or what improvements are needed, that's going to help you with your pricing negotiation. Any issues that they've experienced with the property and what they want to include. I also like to ask, what do you feel this property is worth? Just to get a feel for their expectations of how the negotiations and the entire transaction is going to go. And then on the buyer side, how are you financing this purchase? Do you have, especially in this market right now, do you have extra cash to go towards an appraisal gap if necessary? Do you have to stick to the $200,000 price point, or can you go a little bit higher? Things like that. And what does your ideal property look like? Are you looking for something that needs a little bit of work? Are you looking for something that's move-in ready? These are all going to help determine not only what the best property is for them, but how aggressive they will be in their negotiations.
And then right questions on the on the commercial side of things kind of are twofold, right? In the commercial world, we do a handful of leasing, whether that be representing the building owner, representing the tenant, or obviously we're doing purchases and sales as well. So kind of hit on both sides of that. On the selling side of things, the questions are going to be very comparable, right? If we can figure out why the person is selling the property, that helps us out a lot. Are they trying to get cash out of it for a 1031 exchange? Are they trying to, are they retiring and, they've been running the business out of this building for a while? A lot of those factors can help us in maybe how we might approach the negotiations or how we might put an offer together. Terms can also be a huge factor for us on the commercial side of things. Money is always important. However, the amount of maybe due diligence items or time frame to close, things of that nature, can be just as important in some cases, especially if they have some sort of timeline on the back end, whether that is, they're relocating, they really need to close on this building in a certain amount of time to fund their next deal or whatever the case may be. So really important to try to understand what's going on the seller side. Sometimes that's a little hard to do, although it's surprising what you can learn by doing some research online, Googling the owner, Googling the owner's company. I've found a lot of information that way that I think has helped in various cases I've worked on over the years. So that's kind of nice. And then if we're, on the leasing side of things and we're dealing with more a landlord rather than a seller, a lot of times it's important to really understand what type of deals the landlord's preferred to do. Because when we're dealing with a lease, we might be asking for tenant improvement dollars, we might be asking for free rent, we might be asking for the landlord to do some work. Your client might want a 3-year lease and, the landlord might only do 5-year deals. So I always ask, like, how does this particular building owner or landlord like to structure their leases to get an idea of what they typically do. And usually the broker that represents them is going to say, hey, they really like a 5-year deal. They prefer tenant improvement dollars over landlord work, things like that. They'll give you some indication there. That way, when we put our letter of intent together, we're starting the negotiations along the lines of the way that the building owner likes to work. I always find that we get a little more traction that way if we start off in the right direction. And then, flipping that back, if you're, representing the tenant, obviously it's super important for us to understand all the tenant's needs for their space, their location, their timeframes, their budgets, and what's really most important to them. What I have found before is that if we don't really understand the client we're representing, we might spend time working on something in the negotiations that isn't even important to them, and that doesn't do anybody any good. So definitely very important to understand your client, what they need, what they've got to have, and how we get to that to them. And we spend time working on the important stuff for your client versus things you might think are important that they may not put as much value on.
Yeah, and I
Anybody
think
have
that,
any examples of some cases they've worked on that might, I guess, kind of follow up with some of these concepts?
yeah, I was just going to add, I think that asking these open-ended questions, I mean, some of them may seem obvious, like on the residential side, why are you selling? Well, we're ready to move. But when you ask these open-ended questions and really kind of dig the information out of the seller, it's really going to help you determine what kind of personality you're working with. And just like Reggie said, determining their expectations, how they expect the deal to go. If you ask, what price are you thinking? Some people may say, well, I know that I need to get exactly $200,000 out of this because I did A, B, and C. But the next person might say, well, I don't know, whatever you think. So that's really going to set the tone for how the rest of your negotiations are going to go just based on the way they answer these questions. Do you guys have any other questions that you usually ask up front to your clients, either commercial or residential? They're all going to be quiet.
I'll just give an example. I had a client I've had for years, and he called and he asked about a particular property that he was interested in before, and the property's not on the market. Unfortunately, this client's always looking for something that's not on the market. And he says, hey, could you check? I haven't checked I haven't checked on this for a while. Could you check to see if this property, if he's interested in selling it at a very healthy cash offer? That's what he said. And so I just called him back and I said, hey, it's not for sale. So in order to tell you, if you really want this property, give me a number. Everybody always waits for the other person to go first in these negotiations. And it drives, as we all, and you're probably going to get into that later, Amanda, but somebody's got to go first. And usually in this case in particular, you can't call somebody about a property that's not for sale and say, how much you willing to take for it? I mean, if you're going to offer it, you have to make. So he gave me a number and I'm going to run it by the guy. And I probably won't go to the highest number at first, but I'll say if it was if he was going to offer $1.5 million, I'd say, would you want $1 million? Or would you take $1 million or something, and so forth. But it's, and as far as those characteristics of that you put up earlier, Amanda, as you know, there's people that kind of they have different, they cross between them, and there's various points in each one of them that they have, that I found anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, obviously you have to break it into a certain pattern of it, but it's just kind of interesting that there's people that, like I say, move from one to the other. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yep, I'll agree with you there too, Bob. It's no one ever wants to start. I've worked on a couple similar situations like that recently, where the property's off market and they say, yeah, we'll entertain an offer, and then of course I'm representing says, we'll see what they want for it. I'm like, well, they're not going to tell us. They want you to make an offer. So yeah, those are kind of fun. Excellent. Yeah, and I guess, just an example kind of along the lines of try to keep your deal in terms of what in this example, maybe the building owner wants. I've got a LOI going right now where we went in and asked for some tenant improvement dollars. And we didn't really take anything off the asking rent because we decided the best way was to leave the asking rent where it was, which was fair, and get some, money for work to the space. And that first response we received from them was not cash for tenant improvement dollars. They came back and reduced the rent significantly in lieu of tenant improvement dollars. So that immediately told us, okay, this is how this building owner likes to operate. So our counter offer to try to get more improvement dollars was just to go back with lower rent, trying to keep it in the terms that building owner liked to operate on. And so hopefully we get some traction with that. Kind of waiting to hear back right now, but just an example of if that's the way that the person wants to go, let's see if we can keep along that path, and maybe we'll have more success. All right, Amanda,
All right.
jump to the next page, I guess.
Question?
Other comments?
So this is more referring to preparing your client for the negotiations. And again, a lot of this might seem obvious, but I think that this is a conversation that you guys should be having with all of your clients. One of the biggest things, avoiding voicing your thoughts on the property, whether it's positive or negative, while you're at a showing or an open house. Again, kind of seems obvious, but if you're walking around the house, even if it is presumed to be vacant, you never know about those Ring doorbells or nanny cams, things like that. And if you're, talking about how much you love it, you would do anything to have this property, you're kind of wavering on your negotiation power if the seller does pick up on that conversation. Same thing with a negative comment. If maybe you have nothing but negative things to say about the property, but then you're ready to go write an offer because you decide it's your best option. But now the seller has heard you kind of talk bad about their home, their property, their decor, whatever it may be, and they might not want to take your offer now. So keeping all of those thoughts and comments to yourself as you're walking through the property will help you later down the road with negotiations. Same with talking about your motivation. So if you're talking about, we got to hurry and get into this house by the end of the month, or our interest rate is going to expire soon, so we have to get our offer accepted by this date. Well, now you're wavering on your negotiation leverage again, because now the seller may know, what your motivation is, what your timeline is. Reggie, you got anything to add on here?
Yeah, and I guess that kind of goes along with the, a little bit more in the commercial world. We typically will do all our showings with the other broker, which is what makes it a little different than residential. A lot of times the listing agent's not there when you're showing a house, but the listing agent's almost always there when we're showing a commercial property. So I've learned that we really need to educate the people we're representing to, kind of be careful what they say to the other broker, because whatever they say is going to get back to the owner. Case in point, I've got a deal right now that I think we lost a little bit of negotiating room on because the guy was so excited about the space he couldn't contain himself and was basically like, "We got to get this," and said that to the listing broker, right? So now when we went and tried to get a deal put together, I don't think we got as good of a response as we might have because they really understood how excited my client was about the space. And so that's probably not helping us in the big picture. You guys have any examples of where you've been in a situation where, maybe the client or whatever has done something that has not helped out?
I have a question. So I just went to my first residential showing where the listing agent was required to be there. It was just the seller's preference. And so, and I'm interested in commercial. I haven't done it. So when a listing agent is present, are you supposed to ask them questions, or are they just supposed to be there to open the door?
I mean, on the commercial side, we ask them a lot of questions typically. And questions are good. We just don't want to give away our leveraging, our leverage by asking or exposing too much of what we're trying to accomplish. I don't know on the residential side, and then on that, I typically don't work on that world. So
I actually just had a showing this morning where the listing agent had to be present, but she wound up just opening the door for us and letting us in. I have had others where the listing agent wants to be present and they're walking us around. And I feel like if they're going to be walking us around, explaining things about the property, then I just kind of use them as an additional resource while we're walking through, and I'll ask them as many questions as I can think of. And if they can't answer it, then I'll figure out the answer for myself, and that just makes me look better to my clients anyway. So I would, especially when you have those agent accompanied showings, I would make sure to prepare your client with these bullet points here. But yeah, I wouldn't be shy to ask them questions. I mean, if they're listing the property, they should be the expert on the property. So
I agree, Amanda. I've been to a couple of showings recently where it's been list agent required to come with, and I try and give my buyers a heads up on what that looks like, and obviously that same conversation of vocalizing excitement and whatnot. But I also try and counter that with having the conversation with the list agent prior. Pick up the phone, call them. Hey, with this being you being there with us, are you going to walk through the property? Are you going to just let us in? Can we have a conversation at the end after we walk through the property? What does that look like to them? And just giving your buyer a heads up on how the actual showing is going to go. And then that way you're not having any hiccups at the end of vocalizing unwanted information.
That's a great tip. Just calling and asking, how is this going to go? Because yeah, you do see it both ways. Sometimes they'll just open the door, stand outside and wait for you to be done. And sometimes they want to walk around with you. So to get, knowing what that expectation is going to be is going to make it a lot smoother and easier on everyone.
Yeah, my experience with that is that it's usually a control thing, either by the agent or by the seller.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on who it is, I guess I'd rather see it that way than have hidden cameras all over the place, which you have to assume are there anyway. But
Right.
like Rachel said, I think you basically you can find that out who's trying to get control by asking those questions. That's a good point.
I actually had a funny situation that goes along with this. I think I've told this story a few times, so I'm sorry if you've already heard it. But I had a listing a while back, and I had explained to the seller, she had a Ring doorbell, she had a few security cameras around her house. And when we were going through the paperwork, I told her, you are not allowed to listen to any conversations on this. So if you get any notifications, just ignore them. You're not supposed to be listening unless they're aware that you're listening. And she was like, okay, totally understood. And then I think it was one of the first showings that we had. She called me right afterwards and told me, oh yeah, I heard him on the camera talking about how they wanted to fix this and that. And she's a really nice girl. She works at the med center, and they've got a baby on the way. and they want to fix all these things, but he said that he was really handy and he could handle it. And she knew everything. And the whole time I'm just like, stop talking. Don't tell me this. I don't want to hear this. But she heard their motivation. She heard their entire plan for the house. She knew everything. So when it came time for them to negotiate, they were asking for, A, B, and C to be fixed, and she didn't want to fix any of it. She was like, well, I heard them say that they're handy and they can do it, so why would I fix it? And they completely, I mean, she went against the rules, and I kept telling her, I can't hear this, I don't want to hear this, you were not supposed to be listening, but she had all of that information in the back of her head because they let it all out right in front of her camera. So another good example of preparing your clients before showings or open houses. Has anyone else had any situations like that before?
I think that a common issue too is that people feel like, well, I'm not having the conversation right by the door. We're doing it in the driveway, but that stuff carries. I had a client where they did that. She even said the Ring doorbell's sitting right here. Let's go out to the driveway. Well, we could still hear everything, and so like literally get in your cars.
Even other agents, I've seen other agents when there's multiple showings, and maybe I'm sitting out on the street waiting for my buyer to show up. I had this happen to me a few weeks ago, and I heard the agent talking to their client and discussing every term of the offer they were going to write. They were talking about their purchase price, the escalation clause, they were going to waive their inspection. I literally heard their entire plan. They said it all right in front of me. It's like, okay, well, now I will be able to tell my buyer that, you're going to have to come up a little bit higher than this offer because this is exactly how they're writing their offer. They just told it to me. So always be careful of those conversations, not just from the seller, but even from other agents that are at the property, because you could be going up against them too. You don't want them to know what your terms are going to be.
Well, and even inside of that, you never really do truly know. I did a conversation with a buyer recently that it was a vacant house, but it still had the Ring doorbell on it. But I was there about 10 minutes beforehand. I walked around. There was no other cameras that I saw. But they wanted me to call the list agent right as I was there. And I said, you know what? I'm going to give it a minute. I want to make sure I have my thoughts together after we have talked. And I want to make sure I go back and review what their listing had, the information that was on there, and just kind of remove that conversation away from where your client is as well, because it is going to be a little bit of a different conversation.
Right.
And just trying to make sure that you're doing your due diligence on both sides, but the conversation will always be different if somebody else is listening or involved.
Exactly. All right, let's move on here. So some of the research that you can do, there's a ton of different things that you should be researching, but when you're getting ready to do a negotiation on a property, whether that's commercial, residential, or even in management, you should be the expert on the property. You should be able to answer all of these questions, knowing the obvious stuff like square feet, improvements that were done, but also, different property, land, or uses, what a recent appraisal was, anything that you can use. Also HOA information, what extra costs are going to be going into the purchase of this property, and what bullet points on here can you use towards your negotiations. A lot of people will look at, the list price. That's okay. That's just what it's worth. But we can see now, even as this market is starting to slowly shift a little bit, I feel like I'm starting to see a few listings that are overpriced. We're starting to see a few different price reductions, things like that. And so it's not always just, oh, the listing agent said it's worth 300,000. It must be worth 300,000. You should be doing your research on that local market and exactly, what is the price per square foot? Or on the commercial side, what's the cap rate, marketing times, and the interest rates can affect that too. So any information that you can gather that's going to help you with your negotiation, it's going to make it easier for you and help you get the deal done for your clients.
Another issue, and I haven't experienced this, and some of the people on the call may have experienced it, and I'm kind of curious, is right now, everybody's so excited. They think that, houses are going over $10,000 to $25,000 over asking, et cetera, et cetera. And So people ask a high price, and I guess if you're going to get a price offer that's more than what you're asking, do you have to ahead of time somehow you have to know that that buyer, if they're going to pay that much, or they have a means to pay for anything that's offered that's above the appraisal amount? Don't you have to have that pretty much settled up front is representing a buyer?
Yeah, it seems like a lot of the offers that I've written recently, it's almost like that's expected from the sellers. Well, how much are you going to cover if it doesn't appraise? And it's been tough on a lot of buyers, especially some that I've been working with that, they have their down payment, they have their cash, but they don't have that extra money for an appraisal gap, and it's kind of a gamble. So that's also going to bring in, the personality types that you're working with. If somebody's really big on numbers and, they know that maybe they know this information, the price per square foot, things like that. A lot of people get really turned off by having to pay over the appraisal amount because now you're just making me pay more than it's actually worth. Yes, but that's the market that we're in. So understanding all of those market conditions and market trends are going to help you prep your client and help you with the negotiations on the other side.
Well, and if you're representing the seller, you want to make sure that that's understood. If you're going to accept an offer, that's understood ahead of time, so you don't end up taking it off the market for several weeks. I would think anyway. That all has to, that's a known factor.
And then also researching the other people that are involved. So you're not always going to know what the seller's motivation is or what the buyer's motivation is or anything like that. But we all have social media. We all have, other tools like that where you can just look these people up. It's as easy as Googling their name and getting a feel for them. Maybe they're military and moving across the country. Well, now you have an idea of what their motivation is, or different things like that. So doing your research on the other people that you're going to be negotiating against could help you in the long run as well.
I would also, many of you probably do it already, but if you can find prior listings, a lot of times that has additional information about what's going on with the property that maybe isn't disclosed in the current listing. I know I've had luck with that in multiple cases where I go find an old listing, whether it be residential or commercial, and there's some things disclosed on that listing about the property that magically aren't disclosed on the new listing, for example. Especially some of the prior seller disclosures and things like that can be helpful to just give your client more information about what's going on. And I also think it's important to really understand what's common in the marketplace when you're working through the negotiations. Like, I had a commercial broker earlier this week respond to us with, in the leasing world, a lot of times we'll try to have a cap annually on the amount a tenant might spend towards HVAC repairs. My last couple deals, I've gotten that between 500 and 1,000, and this broker came back and said, market's 2,500 on cap on HVAC repairs. And I was like, well, my last 3 deals were not 2,500, so I don't know if that is the market. And being able to kind of push back on things like that and saying, yeah, that's out of line with what we're typically seeing, I think helps to as far as getting the best deal put together.
Yeah, and especially now in today's market, we're seeing the interest rates go up. The prices have been sky high, but everyone predicts that that's going to regulate soon, especially with the interest rates going up. So I'd say the last year or so, it was really easy to say, oh, this house is listed at 300. Okay, let's offer 350 and just get it done. Waive the inspection. We don't care about anything. Let's just get it done. I think it's going to maybe not shift into a buyer's market completely, but it is going to start getting more neutral to where buyers do have a little bit more negotiating power. And knowing all of this information, digging into the previous listings, like Reggie mentioned, digging into other resource tools besides just the MLS are really going to put you in advantage for your buyers to get them the best price, not just getting their offer accepted, but getting them the best deal that you can get.
Reggie, you make me think of how often, and it happens more in commercial on the leasing side than I see it on the sales or buying on the residential commercial, but you'll have agents say things like you said, that guy said, and they say it like it's a fact and they're just making it up, or they're going by their own experience. It has nothing to do with the market.
Mm-hmm. And Reggie, how does the seller's portfolio come into play?
Yeah, I guess, kind of knowing your players, in the commercial world, I guess we run into situations where, a building might be owned by a publicly traded REIT. Well, they have a completely different motivation in the way they're going to negotiate versus maybe a smaller commercial investor that lives here in Omaha. And so, what I've found is, there's certain people in town that, own so much property that they really, in some cases, aren't really motivated to get a vacancy filled. And so they're less likely to maybe put together the best deal versus a smaller investor that's like, man, 1 or 2 vacancies in their properties really hurts their bottom line, and they tend to be more motivated to put together a more competitive deal to get someone into their space. So I've just found kind of understanding who the owner of a property is really kind of helps give some indication of, where we might be able to get on a deal.
Anything else anybody wants to add on here? Anything else you guys do research on? Alrighty, let's move on. All right, knowing your client's limits, where is their cap at? So these will come in a lot with those initial questions that you've asked, but I think this just kind of expands on that and really getting down into the details of what's negotiable, what's not negotiable. When you get into those quick negotiations with agents, you're back and forth, maybe it's 10 o'clock at night. And the buyer seller says, okay, we'll move 5,000, but you know that your client cannot move 5,000. If you know your client's limits, you know where they have to cut things off, then you can just make that call right away and say, no, that's not going to work. Let's go back to the drawing table. Same with, even as little as things included or excluded from the transaction. Maybe they absolutely need to have, A, B, and C. They need to have the washer and dryer. They don't have one, they can't afford it. They can't afford to buy a new one. So that's not negotiable. We have to find a property where that's going to be included. Same thing with inspections. Some buyers are going to demand an inspection. Some are totally fine with waiving it. But if you're going to have a counteroffer saying we don't want to do the inspection, then you need to know up front, is that going to be okay or is it not going to be okay? Do I need to immediately start fighting for my client, or can I go back to them and kind of talk them into this new solution that we have? Anything you want to add on this one, Reggie?
Not necessarily. I think you did a pretty good job covering it. I would just agree with you, Amanda, in that, really understanding what the client has to have is important in your negotiations. So you're spending time and effort getting them what they really need, versus spinning your wheels on something that maybe they are, not as dedicated to. So
Right.
I think that's pretty helpful.
And then this was something I took from our last sales meeting. If you guys were in there, or I guess that was 2 meetings ago when we had our attorney, Mark Lapuzza, with us. He was talking about contingencies, in the residential purchase agreement, that section 10C, just open-ended. He said that's where he sees the most of the issues that come up when issues come to him. So this is just a formula for you guys to keep in mind when you are writing contingencies into your contract. You need to determine who's going to benefit from this, what is the condition, and how does one exercise it if the condition's not met? Are we fixing something? Are we waiving the condition? Are we extending a timeline? Or is this agreement just terminated? And then what is the timeline for that resolution? So some examples of that, one that he brought up, he said he sees this a lot. Property must appraise. Well, that could mean a lot of different things. That just that we have to have an appraisal, or what does that mean? So using that formula, that simple sentence would turn into, in the event property does not appraise at or above accepted purchase price, buyer has the right to terminate this agreement within 3 business days of receiving a copy of the appraisal report. So you're laying it all out there before any issue happens. You're putting out the potential issue, the resolution to the issue, and the timeline that it'll be resolved before it even becomes an issue. So then maybe, 3 weeks, 2 weeks down the road, when that appraisal comes in, there's no question as to how we move forward. We've already got it in writing. Everyone's already accepted it. We're ready to move forward with this contingency. And one that I see a lot, inspection for informational purposes or for informational purposes only. I think that's so vague, you could really swing that a few different ways. So maybe what you're trying to say is buyers waive the right to request any repairs to be completed by the seller following the inspection. In the event buyer deems inspection unsatisfactory, buyer has the right to terminate this agreement within 3 business days of receiving the inspection report. So now there's really nothing to question on there. We know exactly what's going to happen. They're going to have their inspection. If it's unsatisfactory, they have the right to terminate within 3 days, and that's it, and that's all. And it just makes it a lot simpler. Instead of trying to reopen those negotiations later on after the inspection or after the appraisal, we've already got everything in writing and we know how we're going to move forward. I asked Reggie if he had any examples like this for commercial, but in commercial, it's a pretty simple with their due diligence period. They just have their due diligence period, and during that time, they have the right to cancel at any time for any reason. Have you ever seen any other examples like this that have maybe caused an issue down the road or caused, a difficult negotiation just because the contingency wasn't written thoroughly?
I'll just jump in and add a couple other examples of maybe contingencies that I've seen outside of, this broad one that you just mentioned. It's on the bottom of the screen here. Buyer can cancel the purchase agreement for any reason during the due diligence period. That's a very common. The due diligence paragraph is usually, much longer, but that's the most important piece of the due diligence paragraph, that they have that out for any reason during the time period they've negotiated. But a couple other examples I've worked on, like for example, I've got a lease that we just recently signed here for a daycare. That lease is contingent upon the daycare operator obtaining all their permits from the city, state, etc., to operate a daycare within this space. And in the event that the space cannot be approved or does not get approved for a daycare, they've got the ability to get out of the lease. So that was something we wrote in the lease because it was kind of a unique situation with the licensing requirements and things like that. So, you just got to kind of look at every angle of a deal and figure out what needs to be in there for your client to make sure that they are taken care of.
And Reggie, that you're smart, because that's really important, especially in daycare, but some others, because there's so many things out of the buyer or out of the tenant's control that, they could get all the way down the line, and then some inspector comes in and it's something, and then they put in all this money into it and so forth. So yeah, you see that in especially daycares, but there's some other restaurants and some other things too.
Yeah, daycares are just so tough with mainly the fire requirements in Omaha, and the storm shelter requirements are tough here. So this was an existing daycare location, but we still wanted to have that out in the event they came in and said, well, this isn't up to today's code, and, we got into a fight of who's going to pay to fix it. The tenant would have the option to potentially opt out of the lease, depending on what was required, so.
I think an important note here is if you're ever in doubt, put it in writing and do it up front. I think it was Caitlin that had a question for me recently, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but she's like, do I really need to write that into the contract? Does that really need to be in there? It's like, well, it's not going to hurt if you do put it in there. But absolute worst case scenario, if A, B, and C happens, you're going to really wish that it was in there. So there's no reason why you shouldn't add, your extra contingencies, your extra verbiage, make it as detailed and drawn out from start to finish as you can, and that's going to avoid any possible issues down the road. Everyone might think it's going to go great because everyone's happy and everyone's, sunshine and rainbows when your offer's first accepted or when you're starting to look or negotiate. But, everybody knows down the road is when people start getting upset. People start thinking, oh, they must be trying to scam me because of A, B, and C. But, if you put everything, all the details into your contract up front, then there is going to be maybe not no questions, but a lot fewer questions and a lot fewer what ifs when you get down the road.
Damn, you sound like Mark LaPuzza.
No, I
Well said.
to be an attorney someday, but I don't want to go to law school, so I just listen to Mark LaPuzza a lot. He said in that meeting, I thought it was funny that all of these contingencies are planning for the divorce while you're still on the honeymoon. So everybody's happy, but let's just assume the worst and prepare for it. All right, and then this is something that I took from the Ryan Serhant book, but I think that it goes well with all of this discussion about keeping some cards close to your chest. So you obviously always want to be open and honest with your client or the agent that you're working with, but there are sometimes things that you can just keep to yourself and deal with it yourself to keep the deal together. So I think an example that Susan used while we were in this class, we had a contract together, and when we were going back and forth, there was a little bit of, this and that back and forth with the buyer and seller. And then we finally got our counter together verbally. And when the seller's agent sent the counter back to us, she had some verbiage in there that was never once discussed before. And the buyers were kind of on edge at this point anyway, because we had been waiting so long for their counter. They had been so up and down about everything. We just wanted to get it done and have it under contract. And then all of a sudden we get this counter offer with some verbiage about the inspection that was never discussed. And we knew that it would upset these buyers and could kill the whole deal. So instead, without even telling them, I think I told them, oh, they're having issues getting their signatures. So we're just waiting on them to send us over the signatures. We'll have it shortly. Instead of telling them that they put this ridiculous verbiage in there that you're not going to agree to, I fibbed a little bit, told them we're just waiting, told the other agent that you need to take this out because this is going to piss them off and they're going to back out if they see this. Like, we can't even go there right now. And so she took it out, had her clients resign. We sent it to our buyers. Everybody was happy and nobody had to even know that happened. So if these certain things come up, if it's something that would cause the client to make a different decision, maybe you don't have the answer for it yet, but you should always be delivering any issue or negotiation with an answer. Can you handle it yourself? Then deal with it. The client doesn't even need to know. But if it is something that can affect their decision or affect the contract, then that's something that you need to deliver to them and work it out together. Another agent had a recent situation like this too, where they're on the selling side, where their buyers started asking for things while they were under contract that were never agreed to in the beginning, and they were practically demanding it. And we had talked about it, and I said this was never in the contract. You guys have a fully executed contract. There's no reason that they can change this now. And the buyers threatened to go talk to an attorney. And I think this happened on like a Friday evening. They said they're going to go talk to an attorney on Monday. And so this agent was wondering, should I tell my client? Should I tell them that this is happening? Like, there's nothing that their attorney is going to say besides you don't have this in writing. So you guys really have nothing to worry about. You don't even need to tell your clients because they have nothing to come back to you with. So instead of, telling her clients and getting things kind of heated, upsetting them, making them, think things that may or may not be true, we just let it go, waited for the buyers to come back and say, okay, never mind, we're going to move forward, and everything was fine. I think just knowing when to deliver the news, when to not deliver the news can really help you in managing client expectations and cooperating agent expectations. All right, and then a few tips for negotiating. I feel like I'm talking too much. Reggie, you want to take this one?
Sure, I can take this one. Yeah, so just some general negotiation tips. First one on the list there is let it sink in. It's basically, just saying, anything that you're trying to work through that's a challenge, don't be afraid to give either party some time to digest what is being offered, and don't just kind of have a knee-jerk reaction. Sometimes you might get a counter offer back or whatever the case may be, and you're immediately like, this is ridiculous. I can't believe they sent this to us. Why'd they do that? And if you respond right then, it may not be in the right tone with the right thought process. So give it some time. I think that's very important. And then really understand, where are they coming from? Why did they respond to us this way? For example, what would be our best response to get the result we're looking for? So give some time, think it through. Problem solving. Really that's all we're doing in negotiation, is we're solving problems, right? We've got two sides of the equation. The seller, for example, they're trying to get the house sold. We're trying to buy it. We've got some problem in the middle that we haven't come to an agreement on. So one thing on the problem solving I think is really important is to try to step back and look at the problem, the issue at hand, from both sides of the table, right? We know what our side thinks. We need to put ourselves in the other people's shoes and say, how are they looking at this? Why did they respond the way that they did? And if you can kind of understand that, it's going to give you a better idea and way and process to respond on your side, and hopefully come to an agreement in the end. And we've kind of hammered out open-ended questions. Don't ask the question that's a yes, no, because you won't get all the information that you're really looking for. I know Amanda already talked about that a little bit on open-ended questions. Anything to add on that, Amanda?
I don't think so. I think that this slide here kind of dives a little bit more into those. But always being upfront and honest. I think the biggest one on here is keeping your emotions out of it and keeping your client's emotions out of it. And I like how Reggie said, always looking at it from the other side, put yourself in their shoes, because I feel like I do that pretty often with work and with personal things. I always try and think, where is this other party coming from? And explaining that to your clients can really help ease any heated emotions that they might be having, when clients think, oh, are they trying to screw me? What are they doing here? It's like, no, if you think about it from their end, they're looking at A, B, and C. This is why they came to this decision. And that's really going to help ease everybody's emotions. Also, just being clear on any non-negotiables to the opposite party. Reggie brought this one up. And, if you always want to have your clear and honest communication, you don't want to give away, all of the details about your client to the opposing party. But if there is something that is non-negotiable, this is like a hard yes, hard no, we're not wavering on this, then just throw that out there up front, because you don't want to be 2-3 weeks into the deal and, something comes up and they start negotiating on that item. And that's just going to upset, the other client even more, possibly, if things are getting, a little bit tricky. So just being clear about any of that up front, no questions asked, this is where we're at. then that won't even come up again and it won't have to be an issue for you guys. I think also a big one, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Amanda.
I was gonna say my other one that I like the most on here is remember that you're working together to achieve the same goal. And I think this kind of goes along with keeping your emotions out of it. But, you know, sometimes agents will think that they're working against each other, but really you guys are all working together. You're working with your client, I'm working with my client, we're both trying to achieve the same goal. So let's stop trying to butt heads and just get together and come up with some solutions together.
Yep, definitely. A couple others on here, which, you know, are sometimes hard to do, but, you know, I've read a lot about negotiating, and they always say, you know, don't split the difference, even though we do end up doing that a lot of times. You know, sometimes if you are willing to kind of split the difference or, you know, come to an agreement too soon on certain issues, you kind of give away some of your leverage power. The other side may think, well, we're going to get whatever we want now because they really gave in easily on XYZ situation. So it's important to kind of hold your ground sometimes, even when you think, gosh, we may not get this done. I've been surprised in a couple cases where we've held our ground on whether it be, you know, purchase price or, you know, a term that we have to have or whatever. You know, and if we're holding our ground and being the ones that are willing to walk away, it's surprising how the other side will come a little closer to your side. So it's a little scary at times, and obviously you got to be careful that you don't ruin a deal that your client really, really wants to have come together. But at the same time, you know, our job is to get them the best deal possible, and so sometimes we have to play a little hardball in that respect.
All right, does anyone have any questions or fun stories or anything they want to add?
Any like wins? I'd love to hear some where you're like, this deal should have fallen apart, but we brought it back together because we did XYZ.
I had an incident recently where I went to the site to meet my tenant, and I wondered why he hadn't returned my text right away because we were at the property. And come to be, he's blind. He's with his wife and his son. He said he's driving up, and the guy's blind, and it's just amazing how attuned he was to his other senses and his knowledge. It was just, and even now when I call him, I just have, it's just amazing to me. But I've dealt with mutes and so forth. We talked on previous calls, but this is the first time I've had a blind client, and he is just excellent.
Wow.
I had one where actually it was the same transaction with the seller that was listening to the Ring doorbell, and for a million reasons, it was one of the most stressful transactions I've ever had. But the agent on the other side, my client was being a little bit difficult. Her clients were being difficult. They were both kind of going around us trying to do their own thing. It was making it so difficult on both of us. We were both super stressed out about it, but we got to the point, I'd never worked with this agent before. I didn't even know her, but we got to the point that we were just working together so well that everything finally came together, and we were making jokes about having a bottle of wine together after closing, and actually became somewhat friends with each other. So I think that even on what was the most stressful listing I've ever had, turned out to be a really good experience just because me and the agent were so clear and honest and communicative with each other that it made the entire transaction so much easier. And both of our clients were happy at the end of it because we were able to just talk things out so easily with each other. But that's all we got today, guys. Does anyone have anything else they want to add? Or any Any questions, anything? Lauren's shaking her head at me over here. All right, guys. Well, then I think we'll let you out of class a minute early then. Call it a day.
Thanks,
Thank you
Amanda.
guys for being here.
Yep, thanks for everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.